Listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. This is Joanne Geer. I'm the Executive Director of the Biopharma Research Council, and you are here for our first in a series called Startups, Spin-Offs, and Stories, Getting Involved with New Enterprises. You're going to be hearing from Gary Keller and Sam Consummate in a moment. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organization and learn a little bit about you. The Biopharma Research Council is an association for scientists across all the many silos of biomedical research, which is industry, academia, nonprofit, government, suppliers, and those who love them. We are really, our sole purpose is to get people together, to learn from each other. We will take on any disease, any technology. Each year we do a number of webinars. We do, we do several physical events. I'm going to tell you about some of those in a moment. And I'd like to say that all of our best ideas come from people who have attended one of our events. So I do encourage you to think about reaching out if you have an idea of something you'd like to see, something you'd like to help create, and so on. I just love this quote. I think it's a really, epitomizes what we're all about. This was from a conference that we did last year called D2D, Data to Drugs and Diagnostics, and that's Bob Bolin from Janssen Pharmaceutical. Just a few of our upcoming programs. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be in Boston on May 20th. This is a really interesting program. We'll be looking at CRISPR and zinc fingers and talons and other technologies and models that are emerging now. Merck actually invited us to host this with them because they wanted to find out what's going on in other companies, what's going on in the development of the tools and the technologies. So it was a really wonderful partnership with them that's coming right up. In July, we'll be doing a great program in Princeton, Internet of Medical Things, Cybersecurity and Discovery Development and Devices. The first day will be a workshop on developing a risk management plan, and the 29th will be a full day of conference-type programs. And we are forming a committee now. That's my email address right there, and I'd love to hear from you if you'd be interested in participating in the planning of that event. We've just finished up our short course in the microbiome, and all of the sessions in April are available on our website. And in September, we're doing a full-day conference in Fort Detrick, Maryland, hosted by the NIH, to look at the microbiome and its, whether you can manipulate the microbiome to impact health. It's going to be a really terrific program. I just wanted to share a little bit. There are many different organizations and companies that have made us possible, and I'd just like to thank them. You can enter questions through the question box at any time. If it refers to a specific slide, it's a little helpful if you mention which slide it is, because we'll do all of the question and answers at the end. And off we go. I'm going to introduce you now to Gary Keller, who is the CEO of Zomix, a Chicago-based global technology accelerator and consultancy, providing intellectual asset management, commercialization, and global business development services. He has more than 30 years of experience in international business development for leading biotechnology companies and is responsible for the strategy, establishment, funding, and launch of numerous technology and commercialization initiatives and startup companies. He is president and managing director of the Midwest University Research Network, MRUN. Now, before I introduce you to Dr. Consummate, I'm going to launch a poll that will ask you just one question. And for those of you who are just listening by the phone, the question is, are you currently involved with new enterprises? And the possible answers are, no, but I'm interested, no, but I might soon, yes, just getting started, yes, I've been at it for a while. So I'm going to leave that up while I introduce Dr. Consummate. Sam Consummate worked for over 20 years at Hext, Aventis, and Sanofi, contributing to compounds reaching the market. He was responsible for external innovation in neuroscience and aging research until 2012. Since then, he has started a consulting company working with universities, foundations, and biotech companies, and is now executive director of Neurotrope Biosciences, a small clinical stage biotech company. He is co-organizer of Launch New Jersey, Life Sciences Hub, a meetup group that encourages entrepreneurship, and an honored member of our Scientific Advisory Board. I'm going to close the poll. So what I think you'll see it when I close this, but I'm just going to read to you the levels of the answers, and then we'll go on to the presentation. 38% say not involved yet, but interested. 23% say yes, but I might soon. 12% say yes, just getting started, and 27% say yes, I've been at it for a while. And I'm going to go ahead and share the results. I think you can see that. And let's see, then we're ready to hand things over to Sam.
Okay. Thank you very much, Joanne. And I hope you can see my slides. It's a pleasure for Gary and I to be here today and to start discussing startups, spin-offs, and stories, because what's happening in the industry at the moment is more of an externalization from big companies to small companies, which is something that's happened in other industries in the past and is now happening in the pharmaceutical industry.
All right, Sam, this is John. We actually are not seeing your slides right now.
Oh, do I have to do something?
Did you hit share slides? Or? I'm going to reshare it with you. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Okay. Okay, there we go.
Okay,
Oops.
We see you. So.
Great. Okay. So slide 2 is up now, and it's over to Gary.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have an opportunity to speak with you on this topic. And the first thing that we wanted to address was the traditional pathways of commercialization for pharma and biotech. And this could be really separated into 3 phases. First is creation, so R&D and invention. Protection, which is to look at what the best way is to be able to enable the development of the technology so that it can create value and provide some defense to competition. So sometimes that may be patent protection, as is indicated in the slide, by patent application, but if you're in biologics and it's formulation related, it may be trade secret. It may be know-how related. It depends on the technology. It depends on the market, the competition, and the strategic approach that's been established for the development of the product. Based on that, then the way that the technology is going to be exploited or developed, I should say, into a product is going to be either through license or the development of a company, although there are a lot of other options as well that aren't listed here, such as joint ventures, which would be a growing way of being able to develop many types of technologies, especially given the change in the biopharma landscape from the large biopharmas being the R&D engines that we've known them to be, to downsizing that research, to outsourcing some of that technology development, to insourcing technologies and products that have had reduced risk into their pipelines through M&A or other types of deals, such as licenses or collaborative agreements. And so all of these things lead to the commercialization of new products which have the ability to impact the quality of life, the condition of health, and create value for the stakeholders. This is a slide from the WIPO University Initiative Program, which we did the first educational program in 2012 at Boğaziçi University in Istanbul, Turkey. But WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, a division of the UN, is an extraordinary resource for information on both intellectual property protection as well as the development of technologies into products and companies. I've had the privilege of authoring the Guide on the Commercialization of Intellectual Property and looking around the world at various models and key components of this process, and that's currently in review for publication. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Sam for the next slide on the pharmaceutical industry specifically. So Sam, if you would.
Okay, thanks, Gary. So this next slide is just a diagram of what the traditional pharmaceutical industry has looked like since a little before the Second World War, when the pharmaceutical industry began with the discovery of antibiotics. So you'll see that about 10,000 compounds begets one FDA-approved drug. This is a statistic that's been around since I joined the industry about 25 years ago, and that number hasn't changed, although in practice it probably has. We've got the drug discovery engine that's actually now preceded by target discovery, high-throughput screening, and then discovery comes in where new compounds are synthesized by medicinal chemists. The best of those compounds are selected as clinical candidates. They then go through preclinical development, and the compounds that pass through preclinical development with a therapeutic index that looks attractive for progression then get put into clinical studies after the submission of an IND, an investigational new drug application, to the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. So then phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical studies are performed, phase 1 being generally in healthy volunteers looking at safety and perhaps some biomarkers to show that there's proof of the mechanism that you had started out with in pre-discovery. Then phase 2 involves volunteers who are generally patients to get an indication of initial clinical proof of concept that the idea that you had back in pre-discovery actually has some legs in the disease process. And then phase 3 is additional safety and efficacy and confirmatory efficacy. You have to have 2 phase 3 studies that are positive in order to submit for a new drug application to the FDA, which then occurs after that. So after all of those processes, you've got your one approved, FDA-approved drug. And beyond that, lots of marketing and payers and lots going on in that space to make sure that your drug actually adds value to the healthcare enterprise completely. So what's changed in the past several years is that small molecules have become less important. There's more emphasis on biologics such as monoclonal antibodies, peptides, and what have you. There's more interest in gene therapy, cell therapy. So the environment is getting a lot more exciting from a scientific perspective, such that there are just different approaches for attacking the problem of disease, understanding mechanisms, understanding the best pathways to intervene, and this whole process is being revamped with all of these new approaches. And on top of that, what's been happening is that the pharmaceutical industry, which has traditionally invested everything all along this path with some help from in-licensing from universities and small biotechs, is largely externalizing the research part of the R&D process, such that a large number of scientists have been displaced from big companies, and they essentially have to find new places in small companies where innovation is taking place, and where different approaches to address the different diseases that still have unmet medical needs are taking place. And to that end, in this next slide, we've got, as I mentioned, the downsizing of big pharma R&D and more externalization, such that there's much more corporate venture, partnering, joint ventures with universities, biotechs, more licensing of intellectual property that's coming from universities as well as biotechs, and really pushing commercialization further and earlier into academic institutions. And I'm going to turn it over to Gary now to talk about that part of the process.
Great. Thanks, Sam. So just to kind of step back to what Sam was saying is that there is a huge growth in the approach that pharmaceutical companies are taking for both in sourcing as well as monetization throughout licensing and joint ventures of their intellectual property based on changes in strategic focus of these companies, so that certain clinical indication areas are no longer of interest to the company. We've seen a lot of changes of portfolios between big pharmas, but also as they've downsized R&D, there's also been circumstances where the teams within the pharmaceutical companies have licensed out the portfolios of the projects they worked on to develop them independently as new companies with a variety of different relationships to the original company from which they were sourced. But in general, just to address some of the changes in commercialization, we saw really from the vision of Francis Collins a strategy to look at how to push NIH-funded research further downstream within academic environments. That then transitioned into the clinical translational research efforts that the NIH and federal labs have focused, which provides a stronger emphasis on collaborations, on syndications for research, and also there is now more corporate collaborations. One example that I think is rather extraordinary is Emtigen, which is the Moffitt Cancer Research Center and Amgen in Tampa. And what they've done is create a capacity that is world-class for sample collection of tissues and biologics that they can then use in high-throughput screening to help identify various components that would be relevant for drug discovery or the elucidation of different aspects of a disease. And then there's also an extension of private research institutes. One other one, which is also Florida-based, is that Jeb Bush wanted to diversify the economy of the state of Florida based on biotechnology, and so he invested $1 billion with a key strategy of reaching out to the world's leading private research institutes and asking them to expand with a second location by choosing additional research areas and developing a second institution in the state of Florida to focus on those disease areas. And that has been quite successful because now there is a continuous flow of additional private research institutes that are also now interested in being engaged in that environment because they don't want to be excluded. It is beginning to become more robust, and they've been quite successful. Some of the players, for example, in that market now are Scripps, Torrey Pines, Max Planck, Burnham, SRI, Draper, and others. And so we're also seeing more and more corporate collaboration with pharma and biotech for the development of products. And we're also seeing more and more global collaboration. So the development of products is no longer bounded by country borders as much as now looking across networks of expertise based on the indication or the technical approach that's being pursued for the development of a particular product. Sam, back to you. Are you there?
Okay. Yes, I am. And so let's see. I need to get to the next slide. There we go. I think this one is yours
this is mine also.
as well. Yes.
So this is a traditional slide. Many of you have probably seen it. It's by Compare. It has been reiterated by many people in different forms. And it refers to something that we all will either know of, if we're in startups, will be cognizant of, and the goal is to pass through, which is called the Valley of Death. This is part of the push to ensure from an academic perspective that products are being further developed within academic environments, reducing risk, raising value, and the probability that somebody's going to latch on, pull it out, and develop it. And so the Valley of Death is filled by many different mechanisms: angels, friends and family, seed capital, grants from the NIH, foundations, the institutions from which they're being developed academically, or even within corporations. There are seed funds, there are early-stage venture funds, there are proof-of-concept funds. Each institution has different types of resources, as well as often economic development resources. For example, some states, but not all, will provide one-to-one matching for SBIR and STTR grants. Some will only do SBIR, some will only do Phase 1. Every state is different. I apologize, I don't know the exact status of New Jersey. I do know, because of my work in Pennsylvania and the fact that I'm starting a couple of new companies on the west side of the state, that the state of Pennsylvania does do SBIR matching, and that can make a big difference. As far as VC, M&A, and strategic alliances, these have gone through the roof. It was that, GSK with SR1 as their venture arm was rather unique many years ago. Now virtually every biotech and big pharma has a venture capital arm, and that may or may not be combined with their strategic alliances. So you also have to understand the strategy of the particular organization and their venture and collaboration efforts. So some are interested in investing with an option of pulling it into their pipeline. Some are interested in investing for the purpose of ROI, and they have a different mechanism for partnering. So it's different, but it provides a lot of potential upside because of both the credentialing as well as the expertise that they can provide to the commercialization of the product. You'll see at the end there, IPO, well, that's a window that opens and closes. Knock on wood, it's open right now, and we've seen a number of companies go through. It's an exit for investors, and that's important because when we can provide a ROI to our investors, they normally want to invest again. And if it takes too long or it isn't successful, they're normally a little more hesitant. But there is probably a stronger exit right now with acquisitions and mergers from what I can see. So it's a really good time for the market. The next slide, which I'm sharing with you, is also from WIPO, but I think that the details aren't important. What's important is to look at the rise in intellectual property licensing. And so obviously it starts in 1980. The reason is Bayh-Dole, which was bipartisan legislation that transferred the rights of intellectual property funded with federal dollars for research in academic labs from the federal government, where it did reside and where it was not very effectively commercialized, to universities with the obligation to develop a technology transfer office to focus on the development and to enable commercialization of those technologies. The federal government retained margin rights, so that in the event there was an emergency and the government needed access to a technology based on their investment in the research to develop it, they could get to it. This was only ever most recently employed with anthrax and the need for Cipro, but that was never fulfilled. The second piece of legislation which was responsible for this process was the SBIR-STTR legislation in 1981, which set aside a percent of the federal laboratory budgets for research to support commercialization in the form of grants that would provide funding for a proof of concept or prototype, and then a beta test or clinical trial to show that the product would work. And then there are other phases that have been added since phase 0, phase 3, and they're different by each department. But that is, in general, a very important component for why this is occurring. This also looks not just at the United States, but it looks at the world. And so the other part is that the rest of the world has now also, over time, continued to escalate their interest in innovation as a source of economic development to supply technology as an edge for their economy, to develop skills and jobs, to generate companies and revenues, and to introduce them into a global market. So the pathways to commercialization, some of these I've mentioned, the SBIR-STTR, which is the probably longest standing of these, NIST, which is an agency that can provide a number of different programs for support of commercialization and is very enthusiastic about being able to have both commercialization of technologies and technology-led economic development and collaboration be key components of how communities get developed and how technologies get commercialized. One that I can mention is I-6, which is a regional program of integrated partners in technology-specific areas related to the commercialization of technology, of new products and companies. I-Corp is a more recent evolution in programming by the government. It's based on Steve Blank's lean startup concept. It integrates student teams and mentors to look at technologies, to speak with customers, to explore the best business model, and is a good way to determine the best strategy as well as building capacity for those involved to determine then what the next steps are as the product begins to get commercialized. For private foundations and institutional programs, there are, as I said, a number of university seed grants. There are a number of not-for-profit grant programs. There's always friends and family. And there are a number of new forms of venture capital, including a number of healthcare organizations that have realized that while they support research, they are committed to solutions. So they are developing venture investment arms to support companies that are developing products in the areas they care about. And an example there that I've been involved with is the American Heart Association, and was support for the launch of their venture fund program. And you may very well know of others. Sam, do you want to say maybe a little bit more about I-Corp, because you've been pretty involved with that?
Sure. Yes. So that's the next slide. Thank you, Gary. Yeah, so the National Science Foundation started a program called Innovation Corps, I-Corps, about 3 or 4 years ago, and they've graduated over 400 teams so far. And the NIH has recently taken notice, and they've also started their own I-Corps program. They've graduated one cohort as a pilot to see whether this will work, and they're reassessing, or they're assessing how that went and how to move forward with that at the moment. So I-Corps began with really the push to lean startup, which came in the software industry, and Eric Ries is often mentioned, as is Steve Blank, and NSF took on this process where in the software industry people had created companies, and venture capitalists have put in a lot of money into creating software that nobody purchased. And the idea in Lean Startup is that one would create something called a minimal viable product first, such that it can be tested in the marketplace to see who the customers really are, and then you could iterate that product, that software product, until you got to a point where the customers really liked it. And if you didn't get the right customer, you would do what's called a pivot to readjust your product to meet the appropriate customer. And so this process was put into formalized in the Startup Owner's Manual by Steve Blank, and it's this process that's being taught in I-Corps. And essentially what NSF I-Corps does is teach you the business model canvas, which is this by Osterwalder and Pinheiro, which is an interesting read. They've got a very good website, and you should look that up if you're interested. And essentially the I-Corps program takes teams that have been previously funded by the National Science Foundation and gives them what's considered friends and family funding, about $50,000, to either build a prototype or to go through a 7-week very intense process where they learn about customer discovery, the whole startup process, and the business model. So it's a very interesting program. For those of you who have industry experience, I would encourage you to volunteer to be a mentor for one of these projects. You learn a lot about Lean Startup and the business model canvas, which is very applicable to all kinds of projects. What's happened with the NIH is, because for healthcare projects in the life sciences space, the customer is very far down the line, and there are multiple customers, right? So the reevaluation of the I-Corps for NIH is kind of going through this process of understanding who the customer really is. Is it the payer? Is it the doctor? Is it the patient? And as they evaluate the I-Corps program that's been piloted, I'm sure it's going to get better for the life sciences. So I think the next couple of slides are various stories of entrepreneurship. So back to you, Gary.
So I'm going to share with you a few of my own experiences related to entrepreneurship, and I think I'll lead in with my experience in entrepreneurship. So the beginning of my career was based in sales, and first I launched products for an English company, laboratory equipment, to the U.S. through a national sales force, and then for a Japanese company, and then transferred to biologics, to one of the oldest companies in direct sales covering the Midwest. And as I did that, in the first year I went around and I asked them, what do you buy and where do you get it and what do you pay, and I mapped all that out. And when they gave me the sales awards, they said, what are you going to do in 5 years? And I said, I'll be the head of immunotherapy. And the company said, well, we don't do that. And I said, well, we will. And so I began using the company's core competencies and proprietary products to build collaborations with leading and evolving companies in that field because they were then proprietary products, they were custom, they had the highest gross profit margin, and they were secure products. And so as I then pursued a master's in biotechnology, I was national manager of cell therapy for the company and developed the strategy, recruited my mentor, and started Zomix. As I started the company, I did a number of things, and I was speaking on gene therapy and returned to the U.S. From London and had some medical emergencies with my family in Pittsburgh and relocated and was contacted by one of my former customers with a clonal cell line I had helped convert for a clinical trial, saying he wanted to start a company and asked me if I would be the CEO. In Pittsburgh, I was working with the person who discovered natural killer cells and the person who was the number 2 person for the first cell therapy trial with Steve Rosenberg and the first gene therapy trial with Michael Blaza, and they said, this is good, we should do this, and we'll support you. And so we founded Conquest. I believe in using minimal resources at the early stages of companies, so that company was launched by outsourcing the key components through Zomix as an accelerator model. I was the only employee. We licensed out the phase 1 clinical data and launched the company in phase 1 clinical trials with 1 employee. The company was called Zellerex. It is now called Conquest. It was created in 2002. It was moved to San Diego from the Midwest in 2006, and we then also licensed a modified version that could be used for high throughput screening to determine the therapeutic capacity of antibodies, which created a non-dilutive revenue stream, and the company, which has now begun to accelerate at a much more rapid rate, is doing well. It's called Conquest. The company's raised about $70 million over the last 6 months. In 2006, when that transitioned, I had made a recommendation by going to Florida to look at integrating commercial technologies from the academic tech transfer offices into one location. That was received well, was submitted by the stakeholders within the state to legislation and funded with $30 million for a startup fund, and the Florida Institute for the Commercialization of Public Research, which I was then recruited for as the founding executive director. Today, the Florida Institute, which is a one-stop shop supporting the commercialization of technologies for the state of Florida and has a seed fund that I had lobbied the Senate for the initial funding for, has started 40 companies and now receives $5 million on an annual basis. When I returned to the Midwest, an organization called the Midwest Research University Network, which was started about 13 years ago as a conversation between the big 8 Midwest universities' tech transfer officers about startups. We transitioned the model of the organization so that it covered 14 Midwest states and 2 provinces of Canada, because if we didn't stop at states, we shouldn't stop at national borders, and a great deal of commercialization occurs within the provinces of Ontario and Manitoba. And so it includes the stakeholders within all research institutions that are doing startups, the accelerators that are supporting the success of those companies and the early stage investors, and the organization is now a 501c3 in the state of Illinois. The founder retired, Alan Dines, who was the former head of corporate ventures and corporate collaborations and new ventures for the University of Wisconsin. And we have an annual conference called CATTech. That will be October 15th of this year, and that will be at the University of Chicago at their new Innovation Exchange building. So the next phase is really to look globally and Lithuania is a country where I serve as an advisor to the Minister of Innovation. We've launched the first program for startups called TechnoStart, and so they are using funds through the EU for emerging countries to begin their process of developing better technology transfer and startup initiatives within the country. Also, a lot of this funding is being channeled through a program called Horizon 2020, and programs similar to this, as well as initial venture funds, are being created in countries in many locations. So I would like to now just to turn things over to Sam so that he could tell you some of his stories. I could tell you many stories, but I think that always the most exciting story is the one that's going to occur next.
Okay, thanks, Gary. So my entrepreneurial experience is a lot less extensive than Gary's. As Joanne mentioned, I spent over 20 years in big companies, and I guess doing some entrepreneurship type stuff while there. I was actually laid off by a site closure in Bridgewater, New Jersey from Sanofi about 3 years ago, beginning of 2012. And I founded a consulting company called Rudder Serendip, Rudder for steering from the rear as large organizations or as large vessels are steered from the rear. The analogy is that large organizations should also be steered from the rear, and if they're steered from the rear, they will reach serendipity more rapidly. Anyway, that was the concept. So the consulting company actually worked with small biotechs. My first client was a biotech that had come to Sanofi, and I was working in external innovation at the time, so I had lots of contacts with small companies. And from the small biotech, I rapidly found that university tech transfer offices needed lots of advice, and I'm still doing that. In fact, I had a call with the University of Chicago just yesterday at the Innovation Exchange people. I was an executive in residence, that's the XIR, at Columbia University. I also spoke already about the NSF I-Corps program, where I served as a mentor. I serve as a mentor for NYC eLab, which is an entrepreneur training program that exists in New York City for technologies largely coming out of universities. And one of my consulting projects was with a small biotech company called Neurotrope, where I am now as a regular full-time employee. And Neurotrope is a small, I'm one of 7 people, clinical stage. We've taken a small molecule, natural product from oncology and repurposed it into Alzheimer's disease, and we're studying it in phase 2 at the moment in Alzheimer's. We're virtual. That is, we don't have any labs. We do have an office. When I first started, actually, we all worked out of our home offices. But we're virtual in that we contract everything out to CROs, contract research organizations, and we're actually publicly traded. So we've raised money from private sources, and we did a reverse merger in order to become public. And last year, because of this large shift in the pharmaceutical industry from being vertically integrated to being distributed, looking for innovations outside, and this is especially true in the New Jersey area where large companies have traditionally been located. I started a meetup group that's geared towards helping early stage entrepreneurs get started. And what we do is we provide essentially educational materials. We meet about monthly and cover topics of interest to starting entrepreneurs, early stage entrepreneurs, or people who are interested in entrepreneurship, and also people interested in supporting entrepreneurs. So I welcome you to look us up. We're LaunchNJ Life Sciences Hub. It's a meetup group on meetup.com. And I'm quite passionate about that, and through this we've been collaborating with the Biopharma Research Council on this and other programs. So so those are some stories for us from the two of us, and as people consider starting a company, there's some key considerations, and that's what's shown on this slide here. Of course, the first thing is the technology, and if you're a scientist, which I think most of the audience is, the technology comes relatively easy because that's what we do. There are different sources to the technology. They could come from universities, could come from internal research, could come from ideas, from reading the literature. As you progress that technology, there's an importance in doing due diligence to make sure you understand all the aspects of the technology in depth, any competition, any downsides, upsides, etc. Buy and build means you can either purchase it from a university if that's where it came from, or you may need to build it yourself, or at least progress it from the early stage that technologies come out of universities have. Defend and protect refers to the importance of intellectual property, making sure there's patent protection in order to exclude others from copying your idea. And the technology is actually important in getting investors interested, but even more important is the team, because generally investors invest in people rather than the technology. And in the people, they want to know that the team has the experience to progress the project, overcome hurdles which will undoubtedly occur as you progress these complex projects. And so the team's expertise in science, in business, in finance, knowing whether to do things internally, insourcing or outsourcing through contract research organizations, CROs, and also leveraging relationships that one might have. And for myself, as kind of an older time entrepreneur, there are kind of two groups of people who tend to become entrepreneurs. The very young, early stage people who don't know any better, and the older people who have gone through industry and have seen lots of things and can provide that input and know what sorts of things to avoid and to go after, and know how to, and have a broad relationship base to build new companies. And the third consideration, of course, is financing, and it's usually the consideration that people bring up most often, but it's probably not the most important consideration. It's behind team and technology. And financing can be yours, so you're going to put in your time. That's called sweat equity. OPM is other people's money. That can be angel investors, grants that we've talked about, venture capital, partnerships with smaller companies, larger companies. You can also barter and trade. So there are contract research organizations that will do things at risk with you, so take some risk in return for perhaps some equity in the company. And so there are many creative ways of moving your project forward without necessarily needing cash in order to do this. So I think the next slide comes back to SBIR and STTR, which is probably the best non-dilutive source of funding that exists. and I think, Gary, you were going to cover this.
Yes. So as I had mentioned earlier, one of the most impactful resources created to support commercialization of technologies supported with federal funding has been the SBIR's TTR program. And while this is not consistent as far as the percent of the research budget by agency or the amount that is allocated for each of the phases, this is a general approach. So that the first phase is a prototype proof of concept, as I mentioned, and the second phase is a beta test or clinical evaluation. And the time periods can vary as well, from 9 months to a year for phase 1 and the phase 2s. They're normally against topics that are put forward by the agency, but topics can be submitted as well. There are also exceptions that are made in the amount of funding, depending on where they're coming from. If they are related to national security, they're often significantly more. And then there are phase 3s, which can be supported with government resources that are not necessarily financial. I have become more familiar with SBIRs. We have written a number of them. I have submitted them, but my within my firm, I serve as a director of the commercialization practice for Foresight Science and Technology, and Phil Spessor was the person who was critical in the drafting of the legislation, and companies provided a number of various developed methods for being able to assess technologies being funded between phases and to provide support as well as evaluation for the next phase of funding. As far as, how to engage in a startup. So from what Joanne said, we have some people on the phone that are curious, and we have some people on the phone that are interested. We have some people that are dipping in a toe and some people that are in with both feet. And so I think that that's terrific, and it takes a variety of different types of participation and a variety of different skill sets and at different phases of development. The need by the technology and by the company is often different, and so sometimes you want somebody full-time and sometimes you want somebody part-time, sometimes you need an advisor, sometimes you need a consultant. And that varies, but the goal is to be able to figure out the best resources that you can access and what's going to make the biggest difference in the reduction in risk and the creation of value, because that's what's going to drive the ability for a new startup to succeed. And so as scientists, we can look at being involved as the inventor. And so that may mean that, as I say, an academic inventor, that you stay inside the academic institution, and then your participation is going to be guided by the agreements and the guidelines established by the academic office. Sometimes it's 20% consulting. Some institutions allow inventors to serve in C-level positions in companies. Some institutions don't. There's a wide variety. I've worked with a number of different institutions, a number of different policies. I've also helped craft and implement them within these institutions as well. But if you're an academic inventor and you're interested in participating in a startup, the first thing to do is find out what your guidelines are, because you don't want to step over that. As a company, then there's the opportunity to be a scientific founder by direct oversight of the commercialization. And then as a collaborator, there is the opportunity to be able to have a joint kind of relationship to a startup company and the academic research lab or the industrial research lab, such that you can do part of that research through sponsored research or joint research. And then there's also the ability to be a scientific advisor to the company, and also to engage others that as the inventor or the expert in this area, you may likely have the network of resources for, because it makes a world of difference to have the smartest and brightest people looking at your approach because they've seen many other aspects that you may not be aware of, or that the management team may not be aware of, that can help provide more insight into both what's scientifically feasible, but also what others are doing, what's being done in the market, where things are at various stages of development, and what is most likely to succeed. So with that, I would like to ask Sam if you'd
Sure.
help give us some take-home thoughts.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. So I see that we're running out of time. It's 11:58 over here on my clock. So as we mentioned, the business model in pharma is really changing quite rapidly, from being vertically integrated to distributed. And what that means for pharmaceutical scientists is that you may not be working in a large company anymore, but you're working in a smaller company. Either it's a biotech company, a CRO, or what have you. And this is both a challenge and an opportunity. Small entrepreneurial units are supposed to be more productive. We'll see. It's an experiment at the moment in the business model. And there are lots of new models, which Gary will cover in numbers 3 and 4.
Great. So one is, I'm a big believer in virtual incubation. I think that there's expertise all over the world, and many people have great networks, but they may not be proximal to where they are. With technology, we can employ that to be able to build companies in a smarter and more cost-effective way. The other is we work in a global community. Soft landing by companies with great technology but without the environment to support their development are now setting up kind of launch pads for companies in other parts of the world, including the United States, and I think that's a very interesting and exciting model as well. We see outsourcing by CROs, the use of consultants and contractors, and things being done in a variety of different places to create models for the development of companies that are now producing results that would have been unforeseen by just working within limited spheres and local networks and a local geography. So there's a whole world of options. Every technology is going to have its own unique model, and the key component is going to be the ability to identify the best path forward. But the most important thing is every great journey begins with the first step. So you've got to step out, otherwise it's all going to just be a conversation about what if.
And
that, I think we should probably wrap things up, Sam, because we're out of time.
Well,
okay.
Hi, this is Joanne again. Thank you so much. This is fantastic. For those of you who aren't able to stay, we'll stick around for a few questions. If you're not able to stay, the full recording will be available on our website shortly, and we'll be sending out an email. We have a number of good questions. We may not get to all of them, but if we don't get to them here, we'll follow up with you in response. But I just want to read one that I think is a really helpful meta question. I saw many projects get put on the shelf since the project champions, me and my colleagues, were gone, and there was no one left within the enterprise to run the project. Plus, the project was sidelined because of the other project priorities. I want to convince my former employer to out-license the project to me. How best would you recommend that I convince the company to out-license? I hear a lot that there is no incentive for a company to out-license. Comment.
So I'll take that one. This is Sam. So actually one of the projects I had worked on with a number of colleagues when I was at Sanofi, we wanted to out-license, and we've had a heck of a time trying to get things out-licensed. It really depends on the stage of the company and the incentives that are in place in the big company. For us, the 3 projects we were interested in out-licensing were preclinical, so they were fairly early discovery phases, and there's really less incentive for a big company to work on those projects because they don't really have a whole lot of value from the perspective of a big company, because compounds may not have even been selected, etc. On the other hand, some other large companies see this as an opportunity that you could out-license this project with an option to negotiate a return if it's gone and been de-risked externally by a team that's really interested in the project, like the one that the questioner is asking about. So it really depends on the priorities of the big company to out-license. And it really helps to have a champion within the company that will help push that technology out. That's something that, in my experience, we had also worked on, and it's still as yet not successful.
Thanks, Sam. I have another interesting question from a longtime acquaintance. I want to say hello. We are repurposing a small molecule that has new composition of matter IP and has several rare disease indication opportunities. Are specialty pharma companies the most likely partner for funding development of this small molecule, or do you suggest other funders or partners?
So
Get your crystal ball.
I'll take that.
Yeah.
I would say that first of all, it is going to depend on the indication and the mechanism of action, because an analysis of the market is going to determine, one, what is the level of interest for development, and then the other aspect of it might be, what are the other indications that it can be used for as well, to determine what the best pathway forward is going to be. So one example that I can give you recently, because the largest organization in the world for licensing is the Licensing Executive Society International, and we just had our annual meeting in Brussels, and I am serving as the incoming chair for life sciences. And we present, awards for the best deals, but we also have a conference I helped to found a few years ago called the Global Technology Impact Forum, looking at how technology can impact diseases in third world countries. And we had someone from the U.S. Patent Office speak about their patent for humanities, which was just announced for this year. And the award is expedited patent review by any patent within the portfolio of the company. And so that went to 4 big companies, I think 3 small companies, and for the first time 1 university startup. Well, the value of having expedited review of a patent can be billions of dollars if it will put something forward faster. So, and then there's also benefits of doing rare and neglected diseases and orphan drugs from a patent perspective. So all of these things come into play in looking at what the best pathway is for the development of a product and who is going to be the best partner. It might be a specialty pharma, and it might be somebody else. It's too hard to say without more specific information.
Yeah, and this is Sam again, just to add a couple of comments for your consideration, and you may have already considered these. It really depends on what the stage of the compound is. If it's clinical stage, obviously you're going to need lots more funding. But if you're in the rare and neglected disease space, often the diseases of interest have foundations that will fund some research, and some will even fund companies.
Yeah, Sam, the one that I would mention is BVGH. The BioVentures for Global Health was created as a not-for-profit arm under Carl Feldbaum when he served as the CEO of BIO, the Biotechnology Industry Organization. It now is running a program called WIPO Health with the World Intellectual Property Organization, and is a collaboration of 90 stakeholders focused on rare and neglected diseases. The executive director is Jennifer Dent, so I would recommend looking at their site, which is www.bvgh.org. The other is the National Organization for Rare Diseases, NORD, and that's nord.org.
Terrific. So I think we have one more question. There's some other sort of practical questions about SBIRs and so on, and I'll share those with you later for a response. But here's a more broad question, and I think this will be our last question. Aren't large pharma really still vertically integrated at heart? That is, they're looking for partners to fill in those gaps that have been let go, but it's more of a swap than re-engineering. Your thoughts?
I think the industry is in the process of change at the moment. You know, we had the cloning of the human genome, and that was supposed to solve everything. Of course, things are more complicated. In my analogy, you've cloned the human genome. You've now read the dictionary. You can't study a language by reading the dictionary. So you've got to understand all the interactions between the various words, the genes, and that's going to take quite a bit of time. And so what pharma's understood now is that it will take time, and the best way to study these things is to get things outside of pharma, such that people really interested in those areas are studying those areas that they're interested in, and then they can just go and pick off the best ideas that have been de-risked and then develop those. You know, we'll see. I think it's an experiment to see whether externalizing research is the best way forward. Is it really more efficient, or is it more efficient inside? And pharma is kind of an in-between phase at the moment. There's some internal research. A lot of it has gone outside, and they're looking to see which is most efficient.
So I would add to that in addition to the trending of outsourcing of resources and of research, the other things are that you have to look at it by corporate strategy. So Johnson & Johnson is still very vertically integrated. Companies like Abbott have now broken up into 3 companies with different focuses because they realized that their diagnostics and their therapeutics were no longer really correlated, and that their general supply products were not necessarily critical to the other areas of their corporate research, but certainly of high value with a large volume of sales. So in that case, they took a company that was also fully integrated, and they separated it out. And then many other companies are doing it, as mentioned, by doing portfolio swaps. There's also portfolio pooling in various areas. And so it's an exciting and changing landscape right now within pharma, as well as having the ability to take new approaches and apply them now, because some of the impediments to the ability to do that are now being overcome by having precedents of approvals for new types of technologies, such as gene therapy, which have great promise but had regulatory hurdles and a lot of concerns, or cell therapy, which had some predisposition to being perceived is in a very specific way around embryonic stem cells when it's a much broader field and fully utilized through technologies like bone marrow transplant since 1953.
Yeah.
Well, I really want to thank everyone who has participated today. I want to thank all of our attendees. Thank you to Dr. Consummate. Thank you to Gary Keller. I think I've already got notes here of really interesting ways we can develop additional sessions. We are already in the works with one that will likely to happen this summer. I think it's a key area to think about how can we encourage and nurture scientists to get involved with young enterprises. And I appreciate there's a word that's been spoken a couple of times, which is champion. And I think that's a key piece of the puzzle, is that not every scientist is trained to be a champion. And I think that's something that's really changing in terms of championing an idea, a concept, a new company, and so on. So I appreciate
Joanne, I just wanted to say that, on that note,
mm-hmm.
Because I'm the more external to the Biopharma Research Council and newer to participating. But the one thing that I am clear about is that the council is a champion, and I really get your commitment to being able to figure out how to fully empower and support those that have an interest and being able to commercialize technologies that they have developed scientifically and how to participate in that process and to be able to create some of the tools and insight into how they can achieve that. So thank you for doing that.
Well, it's very kind of you to say. Well, I couldn't do it without people like Sam, and I see a couple of people who are attending the session today who I know well, have been in the vineyard for some time, helping companies grow. It's a great community, so I certainly welcome everyone, and thank you for your kind words. I think we're ready to adjourn. Thank you both. Thank you, everyone. And is there any other last comments either of you would like to make before we say goodbye?
Thanks, Joanne.
Please, Sam.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a very exciting time in the field. Lots of changes taking place, and while change is scary, it's also an opportunity. And I think those of us who are undergoing changes as the industry is changing should be optimistic.
I
agree.
And on that lovely note, I think we'll adjourn. Thank you so much to everyone. Take care.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.